good word, y'all? It's your boy DKB here, back at it again. We're finishing out reviewing the unofficial depth chart ahead of our Hall of Fame game, and this time we are reviewing the defense. We covered the offense already, so check that out if you haven't. But let's go ahead and kick things off with our vaunted defensive line. So right now, as our starters on the edge, we're rolling out Carl Lawson and John Franklin Myers. Really no surprises here. We know JFM has been getting more run on the edge since last year. Seems like the trend may continue this year. I thought there was a chance that JFM may be able to slide inside more with Quinnen Williams. However, it seems like we actually have some surprises in store for this defensive line. So the rest of the starters on the interior for the defensive tackle spot is, of course, Quinnen Williams. And then we have Al Woods. This is interesting because we know that we have a passion for pass rushers, right? Al Woods is not known to be a pass rush expertise or expert in any facet. I think he has like five and a half career sacks, something like that. A run-stopping monster, though. But it seems like Robert Saleh has a plan here. I know I've seen something along the lines of him saying he wants to unlock Al Woods. And so maybe they like what his repertoire of moves are, and what he's been asked to do over the course of his career hasn't parlayed itself into him racking up a bunch of sacks. Now, even with him being quote-unquote unlocked, I wouldn't say expect, 7-8 sacks out of him. But he may be a consistent presence that's going to eat up an additional offensive lineman for his other three guys on the line to go out there and have more favorable matchups, which is probably what the plan is, right? He's a guy that one-on-one, he's not going to penetrate the backfield immediately, but he's still going to be quite a handful for any single lineman with his size, his power, and he has decent movement ability. He's just not up there with anyone else on the defensive line. So it'll be interesting to see how he's utilized, especially since he's going to be rolled out there as a starter. He will be, of course, partaking in probably more pass rush snaps than you want. But we'll see how they end up panning that out. Second string out on the edges again, we have Jermaine Johnson and Michael Clemens. Technically no real surprises here. Now, Michael Clemens is expected to have more of a role as a defensive tackle this year. I'm not sure what the splits will be, but he'll probably be essentially our version of JFM, right? You love what he can do setting the edge and his ability to go out there and be a pass rush presence, but you feel much more comfortable with all of his athletic traits being at the defensive tackle spot, where it's less of an angle he has to take, less steps, all of these different factors that are going to rushing the passer. And he can use and abuse centers and guards much more easily than he would a tackle who has a few different outlets and plans and ways that they can minimize the impact that Michael Clemens will cause. Now, this isn't to say he'll be strictly there, of course, based on this depth chart. But, we'll see who he ends up bumping, right? You have Quentin Jefferson and Solomon Thomas on the second string of the defensive tackle line. If anybody was to get bumped, I would put my money on Solomon Thomas, as much as Robert Saleh seems to have an affinity for this guy, just because he does all of the right things the right way that Robert Saleh would love it. A great program guy. But in terms of the production and the actual, statistics getting put on paper, he's not a guy that matches up well in that category. Now, with Jermaine Johnson, it's interesting that he's been seeing a lot of first-team reps recently that we talked about over the course of the last couple training camp practices. I doubt he'll be able to crack the first string, right? Carl Lawson is a guy that I realistically think we'll see hit the double-digit sack mark this season. And then, of course, you have John Franklin Myers, who may not, eclipse double-digit sacks, but he would be the most likely candidate to be replaced by a guy like Jermaine Johnson. If you wanted more of a, if Jermaine Johnson takes that step and truly breaks out, it'll be interesting to see what the debate there is for Robert Saleh and Jeff Ulbrich, because you would want potentially two double-digit sack providers to start. However, then you have to reshuffle your whole interior, your defensive line. Does that mean that JFM now actually goes back and sees defensive tackle reps over a guy like Al Woods, and then you push him back and so forth? We'll have to see. Obviously, everybody on this defensive line is going to eat. It's just the way that Jeff Ulbricht's rotation happens to work. The guy that played the least amount of snaps last year would have been probably Jermaine Johnson and Michael Thomas off the top of my head, and they still seem somewhere around 300-ish snaps. It's more so about how effective in the rotation some of these guys will end up being. For our third string, we have our rookie Will McDonald the fourth. We have Bryce Huff. Again, kind of interesting with Bryce Huff. We know he's our most elite pass rusher. That's not an argument or anything that's in doubt. But he is very much so in a very singular role where we really just want him in straightforward situations where we know they have to pass the ball, which are going to be, any down and long distances for the most part. And, we've seen his snap count take a hit due to that. Now, if he was to show any kind of run stuffing ability, I'm sure he would bump immediately up in the pecking order. But this is a guy that, for being a one-trick pony, it is a hell of a trick. I mean, he's been on a rampage during training camp, using and abusing anybody that's lined up, Billy Turner, Mekhi Becton. I'm not sure if he's actually been flipping sides, but for the tackles that we've rolled down, nobody's really been able to stop his progress out there. And then with Will McDonald, we hope he becomes Bryce Huff 2.0. He has a nasty assortment of moves that he's working on, and you just hope that you kind of see consistent flashes from him, right? In an ideal world, he probably finishes his rookie season with 8 sacks if everything breaks right, in my mind. But he'll probably have a stat line that's maybe closer to Jermaine Johnson, 2.5, 3 sacks or so, and then however so many, tackles. I don't think he'll be a guy that necessarily lives in the backfield in terms of tackles for losses, but still definitely a much better run defender than a guy like Bryce Huff. And then in our fourth string, we have the recent pickup, Ifeadi Odenigbo. Probably ruined that. We have Marquise Spencer, our defensive tackle, and then Deslin Alexander, our UDFA out of Pitt, out on the edge. And he's a guy that I would say keep an eye on. Highly unlikely he cracks the rotation here, but he's been doing some pretty solid work during training camp, so he would be a great practice squad addition for a guy that you hopefully would like to see end up as a second, third stringer, a year or two down the line. But he's ready made to go out there and start right now. If there was going to be another version of a guy for us like a Solomon Thomas, but on the edge, it would be a guy like Deslin Alexander right now. So moving to our linebacker unit, no surprises. Jamien Sherwood, C.J. Mosley, Quincy Williams starting things out. Zaire Barnes, Chaz Surratt, and Hamza Nasruddin is right behind them. And then our third string unit, Malik Hall, Caleb Johnson, Claudin Cherilus. Literally not a single surprise here. Jamien Sherwood, of course, holding down the weak side linebacker position. Seems like that's where they have Zaire Barnes dedicated to, right behind him, and then Malik Hall being one of my favorite UDFAs that we picked up over this offseason. So I'm hoping we can definitely sneak him onto the practice squad as well. Super excited to see how he does during these preseason games. But realistically, the only guys I really have my eyes on from a least talked about perspective, which I've been chatting them up a lot recently, would be Zaire Barnes, Chaz Surratt, and Malik Hall. I'm not expecting much from Hamza Nasruddin. I thought there was more holes in the games of Caleb Johnson and Claudin Cherilus. Just from what I was able to dig up, they probably were some of the least informed scouting breakdown videos that I put out for some of those other guys, but it is what it is. Moving into our secondary at the nickelback slot cornerback position, we have Michael Carter II as our starter, Javelin Guidry behind him. Literally no surprises. The moment we picked up Guidry again, we figured we wanted an emergency option in case MC2 was to ever go down that we were comfortable with. Javelin Guidry has proven before that he's more than capable of being able to go out there and handle his duties there. So no surprises. And then, of course, our boundary guys, we got the big Sauce Gardner, DJ Reed. They've been looking amazing during camp. DJ Reed's been impressing me more so than anything I've read up on with Sauce Gardner, just because, again, he doesn't have all of those physical traits and attributes that you would love out of a prototypical cornerback. He's just a guy that goes out there and he gets the job done by any means. I love last year seeing him climb the ladder for that interception. It's proven that height isn't necessarily the biggest factor, but we've seen some pretty impressive pass breakups from like him covering Tyler Conklin. Obviously, we have a bigger wide receiver core, so I think you can say that at least on the early returns, he's learned from his bout with like Justin Jefferson last year, and some of the trickery guys like to do offensively last year with trying to find key matchups against him, as opposed to trying to test Sauce Gardner on the other side. So really looking forward to what he does. Second string, we have Bryce Hall and Brandon Echols. These are two guys that realistically may not be on this team by the time we make our final cuts. Bryce Hall, a potential trade candidate, and then Brandon Echols, he's serving that suspension. A lot of you guys that comment and chat with me, you guys feel like that 1-game suspension would be more of a concern than what I guess I've been making it in terms of him potentially getting cut. For what it's worth, you take a look at our third string unit, Jimmy Moreland. He's been making a lot of plays in camp, a couple returns for touchdowns, and getting the interceptions on its own is already a huge thing, but being able to go out there and score points off it as well, a huge factor for this team that doesn't need it as much as we did when we were looking at Zach Wilson and stuff last year, but still a huge help for not having to put all of the work on Aaron Rodgers in this passing game. Along with Jimmy Moreland, they have Craig James as the third string unit, and then our fourth stringers, we have Derek Langford, the only undrafted free agent cornerback we picked up. Freaky physical attributes for what it's worth. Super agile guy at his size, another 6'3" dude. So if he can piece some things together, he could be a hidden gem for us 3 years down the line. Javelin Guidry also is listed as a fourth string boundary cornerback for us. He is capable of being able to kind of play both sides. And then we have Dane Cruikshank, another one of the recent additions. Makes sense unless he went out there and balled out immediately. He was always going to be on the outside looking in. And then, of course, we have Justin Hardy. Rounding things out, cornerback is basically his designated position, but he is purely a special teamer after only seeing one defensive snap in 2 years for us. And then at the safety positions, Jordan Whitehead, Tony Adams making the way. You guys know my affinity for Tony Adams. Jordan Whitehead, I'm just hoping we see a strong bounce back season from. Ashton Davis and Adrian Amos is backing things up. Now, this is pure veteran speak at this point. Ashton Davis at least is a core special teamer, and he's at least made some plays over his tenure. Again, looking at his interceptions, you think he's better than he is. There's only been 1 or 2 out of his, I want to say he has 5 or 6, that have been generally impressive in terms of him being able to diagnose and actually react appropriate on the play. Everything else is kind of right place, right timing. But you make the plays that come your way. So, credit given where credit is due. And then Adrian Amos is working his way into potentially being a starter. So we'll see if there actually truly becomes a competition between him and Tony Adams. But I personally think Tony Adams is running away with it. He's been making a ton of plays. Not just interceptions, but he's going out there, he's wrapping people up, he's showing his range to get involved in plays he shouldn't have any business even being in. And so I'm really expecting the NFL world to be surprised and, him to maybe potentially have a Jordan Poyer type rise. And then you have Trey Dean and Marquise Waters, our undrafted free agents at the third string slot. Trey Dean, you hope he can carve a rollout, but he'll have to beat Ashton Davis, and that is if we can find a way to keep 4 safeties on this particular roster. And then I mentioned Dan Cruikshank with the cornerbacks. He's actually listed with the safeties here. And then we have Jared Bernard Converse, who's actually listed as our fourth string behind the free safeties. So interesting to see that our most recent draft pick is behind, an undrafted free agent in Marquise Waters. I don't know. It's tough sledding for him to try to make the roster, right? Doesn't look great as a cornerback. Definitely look better as a safety, but you're talking about him being a year removed from that. And then still, he was pretty bad in coverage. So you probably need to almost rebuild him a little bit as well. But it's tough sledding to try to figure out if you can save a roster spot for a guy like him as well. But to each their own. I mentioned this before, at least when constructing this roster, it's worth mentioning Joe Douglas hasn't parted with any rookies in their first year. He's found a way to squeeze them onto the roster, so there's, that factor that needs to be considered. But always trying to break trends, especially when you're in a position no general manager or head coach tandem has been in quite some time, which is actually realistically looking to achieve a Super Bowl. So either way, let me know what your guys' thoughts were about this defense and what we're seeing early. And I'll catch you guys again. Peace.